the creative journey. It's easy to get lost, but don't worry, you'll lift off. Sometimes you just need a creative pep talk.
One of the trickiest aspects of trying to have a creative practice is the fact that you're also just a living thing. Like life is happening to you. And it's hard to even know, like, where does your personal life end and where does the work begin? And what do you do when you get thrown into the unthinkable and it derails your entire life, never mind your creative practice? We all have moments like these in our lives. Some of us have bigger ones than others. But when it comes to talking about creative practice, especially online, it can feel like there is no space for this stuff. And that's a problem because that stuff is life. Like that's a big part of what it means to just be alive. I saw some recent writing online and some whispers of a new book from a few new books from a friend of the podcast and a past guest, author and illustrator, Rebecca Green. And I thought I'd reach out to her and see if she'd like to do another episode. In the correspondence leading up to our chat, Rebecca asked if I thought it would be okay to talk about one of those personal moments that she had that changed everything for her, and that included her creativity. So in 2023, Rebecca and her husband lost their baby shortly after she was born. I can't imagine a more traumatic experience, and my heart just really breaks for them. When Rebecca offered to speak a little bit about this, I was moved and I accepted, hoping that it might shed light on the side of creative life that you don't often see online. We had spoke a little bit online in the past before leading up to this chat, and we spoke a little bit before the recording about it, but just to set the scene a little bit and share my intentions, I didn't want to pry or dig deep on specifics of the situation beyond what Rebecca chose to share. But I also just want to say again at the top of the show, thank you, Rebecca, for sharing. And again, I'm just so sorry for your loss. This chat starts here, but it evolves into a broader conversation about creativity and personal life and how they can be at odds with each other and how they also go together and sometimes turn into the most deeply personal creative projects. I know that this is a heavy topic and I wanted to give you a heads up about it, but I also just want to say that there was also a ton of hope and light in this conversation, and I left feeling really moved and inspired. And you also fairly recently moved house?
Yeah, we just moved this summer again. So now we live in upstate New York. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a big, and it seems like it's a big project too.
Yeah, it is. It's like a massive, like gutted renovation. I don't think my husband was like looking for that much energy to put into a house. And I wasn't either, but we just found this very quirky house. It was so hard to find houses here in the areas that we wanted to live. And we found this very random house, and it's right in the middle of a little village where we can kind of walk everywhere, but I drive downtown to my studio. So it's, it's a cute house. It just has required a tremendous amount of work. So that, I think that has added to this year feeling so unstable because I don't really like have a home, like just maybe 3 weeks ago, we finally could cook for ourselves and finally got a stove. And so it's definitely no like small feat.
It's very destabilizing, more so than you kind of guess it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. And moving is in and of itself a bit, it's a huge undertaking. We've moved so much. I feel like I'm so used to it, but I think this was like a whole other level of of that, just not really like having a space to land, but it's good. I mean, I'm happy. I'm happy we moved. It was a good thing for us. So
yeah. And I know you do a lot of, you write on your blog, and you send it out as a newsletter as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I read your most recent one, which was in December, and you're kind of talking about nestling into this home, and you mentioned Wintering by Katherine May, and you're kind of trying to find your bearings in a new place. Is that kind of what it felt like?
Yeah, 100%. I just feel like I don't know, I've always just sort of like ran at full speed, and this was maybe because of everything that happened, maybe because I do think that's because of what it was, just sort of trying to get into this like, I don't know, level, like this back to neutral. And it felt like that is like the solution, is to winter in and almost just like close the entire world out and just like focus on like the tiniest things that I can, and kind of keep everything going at like a very bare minimum. Her next book is on my list, because I feel like that after you get back to neutral, you kind of have to find the magic in the world again. So that is something I'm working towards, but it feels nice to just sort of like have a base.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I loved Enchantment, was incredible, a great book for that. And I think you were touching on this. I really appreciate you, when we spoke over email prior to this, mentioning being willing and wanting to maybe talk through some of how life circumstances and your personal life has impacted your creativity, because I think we take for granted that the creative journey is just going to be kind of this isolated thing that's up to the right, like growth and just doing its own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's disconnected from who you are or what the heck is going on. And that's just not really the case. And so is that what you were getting at in terms of?
Yeah, for sure.
What you've been through over the past few years? I don't know.
Yeah.
If you still want to explore that.
I would love to talk about it. When you first reached out, I thought, I don't know if I'm like at a place where I can like verbalize so many things, but I'm just working through them right now. And one of those things that I'm working through is just my relationship to creativity after everything happened. Feels like my whole being is like a new person. I don't know. So what happened was, in October of 2023, we had a daughter, and we lost her shortly after birth. I think there's so many sort of avenues to talk about surrounding that. But one of the hardest parts for me was that, like, aside from maybe a little bit different than loss. I mean, every loss is huge in its own way. I think the hard part for me with this particular situation was that with a new baby, there's like so much buildup, and there's so much anticipation, and everybody's life around you seems like it's about to change. And certainly my life felt like it was about to change. I felt so prepared, your nursery is ready. I've read like so many books. I was like, this is going to change me as a person, becoming a mother, and, watching my husband, like, it was just, our whole world was about to be different. And it just like blindsided us completely. It was out of the blue. It was out of nowhere. It just happened. We really don't know why. They couldn't tell us why. I think humans are just fragile, and babies are fragile, and I think it is something that happens, but we don't really like to talk about it happening, because it just feels too, I don't really know if it's taboo or what, but so when it happened, I couldn't believe it. I was in shock, and took me a really long time to, I'm still on that path, to kind of getting back to myself. And it's been interesting in the past year. Right after that happened, for the first 3 months, it probably took a month. I couldn't get out of bed, and then I thought, well, this will not change anything. Like, I just feel miserable in this bed. It's not going to bring her back. And so I started I'm working on this book series I've been working on for like 5 years. And I do feel like in those first 3 or 4 months after everything happened, I just had this huge amount of like energy and devotion and care, like for her, that I didn't have anywhere to put it. And so I put it into my books. And all of a sudden it seemed like I was having problems. Like I wasn't sure exactly how the finals would be executed. And it was just, I was in flow. I figured it out. I felt like, the books are dedicated to her. And I felt like, okay, I'm putting all my energy into this, for her. And then that sort of shifted into, actually this summer, it was such a light feeling. It's hard to explain, but I almost felt like there are no rules in this life. And it almost felt free. Like, okay, if that can happen, then like, it's all bullshit in a way. It's all made up, this construct of whatever. And I just sort of felt like light, like, okay, well, screw it. I mean, I'm here and that happened and I'm living. And then fall came, which was when she was born. And I think that just sort of like wrecks me all over again. So in the last couple of months, I'm working on the books and they're not coming to me easily. I'm having to fight for them. I'm having to sort of like, feelings that used to feel like right on the surface, feelings like the source of where all my work came from was I was very sentimental about life and celebrating it and those small things. And I appreciated it. And I just felt so deeply. And then in, the last couple of months, I just think like that, the source of like that depth of feeling is like, I don't have it. So it's been a year of like, even it's not been all sad. It's not been all, obviously not been all happy, but I'm trying to like maintain a workflow and maintain like this level of, dedication on this project.
Yeah.
But I do feel like I'm sort of all over the place,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I have not been through that. I can't imagine that. I've had times where being a sensitive, creative person and that sensitivity that is so much about what makes you a creative person. And then when you go through a depression or a trauma or a tragedy, I don't know if this is what's happening, but for me, I find ways of distancing myself from that sensitivity because it just becomes too much. Mm-hmm. And then after that, having these seasons of how do I safely tap into that, or it feels more risky now. So I can definitely on a smaller level relate to that. But I want to say, first of all, like massive thank you to sharing this, because I do think, especially online, when you're watching a creative journey of another person and you feel like this thing needs to just grow in a perpetual way. And it's really, I think there's an element to the online nature of it where it really disconnects from reality. Mm-hmm. And I know for myself and for so many other creatives, I mean, all creatives have lives.
Yeah, we're alive.
Right? We're alive. Yeah. And life comes with all kinds of different stuff. And that stuff is where the creative stuff comes from. But it's also, I'm really grateful for you just sharing like this bit of reality and how it impacted your derailed probably everything you were focused on and what you thought was going to happen and all that. Because I think there's so many people, I get messages from people that have long-term illness and just chronic things or things that come and go or family stuff or whatever. And there's just it doesn't feel like there's a ton of space online, especially to acknowledge that, let alone share it.
Yeah. I think it's funny because it's not funny, but it is interesting. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about. It's when I think the timing of our careers is interesting too. Just when we started, all social media started, and so we're sort of growing with it. But there was, from my perspective anyway, this desire to sort of build an identity online that was like a bit unshakable, or like a bit concrete, or you had to have yourself figured out enough to show the world who you were. And it's like we sort of expect that people just stay, singular in their practice, in their industry, in their life. And I think on the other side of that, I have shared it a little bit. I haven't shared it a lot, not because I don't want to talk about it, because I actually feel like it's very therapeutic to talk about it. And it's really, I don't talk about it in person a lot at all, especially now that we've moved. But it's a difficult thing online because talking about it, I feel like I never want people to think I want sympathy. I want to just talk about it. Sure. But, online, there's not like a lot of space for back and forth conversation. And if there is, I'm overwhelmed by that. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to have those meaningful conversations. And so I just sort of keep it, I don't share a ton of it, even though it's like such a massive thing. And so one part, like you talked about a little bit earlier, one part of my practice has been to send out newsletters. And I've done them for 4 years, every single month. I do a ton of stuff on Patreon and do a blog post. And so a lot of that is outward to the world. And part of that sort of nestling was needing to just be alone and not have anything to share. I just feel like I don't have a lot of energy, and that's a whole other side of being a creative. And it's such a balance between your internal world, experiencing that, feeding it into creativity, but then how do you balance that outwardly with people that you don't know or people that you are close with? Or it's just a lot. It's a lot that we're all, I feel, maybe just navigating in ways on our own, because we're all, I feel really solo actually in my career. Not that's ideal. It's not actually, but there was just no instruction manuals for this, especially when I went to school, there was no social media. And so anyway,
it's an interesting element to it is, you, like you said, you want to build this stable thing. If you're making this a career, you want some stability in that. And unlike other businesses that you might have, this being a creative outlet, it's so deeply connected to who you are. Mm-hmm. For the longest time in the podcast, in my illustrations, whatever I was doing, I would be mining my experiences for filtering into creative work. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that has been really powerful and positive. But then there have been times in the past 5 years or so where things are too personal, or I've learned the boundaries online, or I need bigger boundaries there because it's just not as safe as I thought it was in the creative community, or it's this isn't, it reminds me a little bit of Sufjan Stevens' album, Carrie and Lowell. He was talking about how when he was making that about his mom, initially there wasn't very much metaphor. And it was he was this isn't art. This is real life. And I'm not romanticizing this. And it's not, I don't think there's any right way, because I could go I've gone back and forth on the same experience with that. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of what comes up for me. We're learning how to be alive in this time, online in this time, and build a creative practice in this time. And it's all fresh and it's all new.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, it's hard to know whether things are too sacred to put, and then you find yourself sort of wanting to use them.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Naturally, because I feel like that's just what we do. And that's why we have the jobs that we have. But then, yeah, if you're putting it out there, then it is a thing for business, and it's a very bizarre.
It's a weird thing to balance. And
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you talking about how you found all of this creative energy and this generative energy. I had a really similar thing with the project I did about my mom. When I first started doing that, I was like, it felt very like there was another realm in which there was material, like a type of material that I had access to. And it was the same material that was the pain and the grief. I kind of couldn't believe that. I felt like I was taking that same thing and I was doing something with it. It felt very concrete in a way that I would never have guessed. I don't know if that
was that translates. A good feeling?
It was a great feeling.
Okay.
It was a great feeling.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that series, I think, was so powerful. And like at that moment when you're sitting there with your mom and she's reading your book, I was just, it's so powerful. And I just thought, it's really brave to take that and put that out in the world. And so, and in talking about that, it's not really, it's the total opposite of taking something and making it work or business. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I can't imagine you were like, this is a great business opportunity. It's not, that's not what it is, but it's just that sharing was so powerful.
Thanks. And but it reminds me of what you were talking about. And one of the things you mentioned to me beforehand was that as you went back to these things you've been working on for a long time, having these experiences that you've been through meant that you were a different person showing up to those.
Yeah.
Well, could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I'm still trying to sort of like wrap my brain around it, but so I started the book that I'm working on in 2019, and it's been a huge ongoing project that I've worked on and devoted like just hundreds of hours to. I can't believe that I'm so devoted to this project. Like I always just like churn over things and get over them. But this one I'm like, I love it. It's going to be like the biggest project I ever do in my whole life. I just feel like, I don't know if I could ever devote so much energy to a single thing. It's a book series of 4 books, and there's 2 main characters, and it really stemmed from their dialogue and their friendship and sort of this world building that I saw. But when I first kind of came up with them, the stories were like flooding, like they just came to me and it's like when that happens, you trust it. I also like don't trust it because I'm like, this is too easy, like this is too good. That's just like, and it felt like that's not serious to like have a mouse and a bee having a conversation about, apple pie. This isn't serious work. But I just couldn't stop thinking about them and drawing them. Like I would wake up in the middle of the night and just like have to record, and I would go for walks. And I think at the time I was living in Japan, and I loved it. It was an incredible experience. I was also extremely lonely and very isolated. And that was like a deep pain for me, I'm like a people person. And I think truly I came up with them as like is an extension of like what I wanted, like a home and companionship. And so anyway, I have been developing them, and they've kind of changed course. And, I finally in the last year or so really nailed down what the books are and sort of put all the pieces together. And it has been just sort of it's been a long haul, craft. And I think that the stories sort of just have continued to come to me, not like with that much force, but now it's like work. Now I'm like really working, trying to figure out all the pieces and lots of trial and error. And right after we lost Sovi, like I said, I just felt like such a rush of energy towards it. And now it's so hard for me. I don't know if like if I can even really explain it, but in my head, it's just has always been so easy for me when I'm inspired to sort of like go internally and see like a video, like, or a movie or a scene or something play out, you know, like I can see the lighting, I can see these characters talking to each other and here, like I sense it, you know, and I've always like, oh, that's easy, you know, because it just feels natural. And now I can't access that. And now I'm like, what a gift that was. Didn't know it, but I was just sitting in my studio in the last couple of weeks and honestly just, you know, I'll just sit here and like, just try to stare at the wall and think, like, just try to feel that deeply, try to conjure these images. Yesterday, or like for this last week, I'm trying to finish one of the stories on this book. The book is due like at the end of the month. And so I'm trying to come up with these stories, and I just feel like I'm dragging myself through mud to understand like the emotions of these characters, to understand stories, to understand the world, to just like connect that deeply with them again. And it's so difficult. But I will say in the last day or two, even, I feel like it's been a lot of work, but I know it's there. Like, I know I'm still that person. Like I still have the same brain. I still could bring it back. And I've been just like trying to force myself to think in that way. And I came up with this story, and I was at home at night and I was doing the dishes, and it was like 9:30, and I was like, yeah, okay, I think that's the story. And I went and I wrote it down, and I was so excited to come to the studio yesterday. I sat in here and I typed it all out. I was like, I think I can still get it. Like, I think I can still access this world.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think that because the books are all about celebration, like the stories aren't like plot heavy at all. They're very surface, but they're about like, the relationship between these characters, the other characters that are in their little neighborhood. But basically they're just having parties, and they're just like celebrating the seasons. They're about food. There's like poems, there's recipes. They're very light. But they also have this like humor and sadness that feels like deep to me. And hopefully that resonates when people read them. But, in a way, I do feel like forcing myself to connect with them is almost like re-teaching myself in the moment to love those things again, because I have to. So I think it almost in a way like comes full circle, and here they are to like save me again in some wild way, you know, which feels like a gift. Yeah.
I have this image of creativity being like a slingshot, where there's a lot of things that make a slingshot work, but the most exciting, freeing part is when you let go of the thing that you're slingshotting. So there's this let go, and that's when the big thing happens. But you can't say, well, it's about letting go, because it's also about the pulling back and the tension and, you know, the muscular side of that. And I'm thinking back to when we talked in 2021, and you had gone through after making How to Make Friends with a Ghost, and doing a lot of illustration of other people's stories, and feeling like, well, I don't really know if I'll do that. I don't know. You know, you didn't feel like, oh, that was something that you could access again then. But it just feels like to me that I think the hardest part about creativity is trusting the stages in the process, and knowing that, yeah, that was the stage at the beginning of that project where it's this flow and you're capturing it, and there's magic. And then there's just showing up and doing the work and just crafting it after the fact, and then making sure you get it out into the world and finish it. And it's not it doesn't feel as magic, but that's the work. And I think there's a really strong relationship to that. And you also have to trust that, like, yeah, the magic part of the process will come again too, for maybe a different project or, you know, whatever. Yeah.
Or in little moments too, right? Yeah. Like you find them, like when you and it maybe isn't the same. Maybe it's not like a story, but it's like, oh, when you get that like expression right, you know, and it's like, yeah, there's so many like tiny, not even epiphanies, but yeah, just like those moments of magic. I mean, that's what keeps us like making anyway.
Yes.
You know, there's got to be a bit of joy in that work part. But yeah, it is just a tremendous amount of work, and you have to like love it. So I think if you can have those things come to you and harness them, and you've got, you know, there's enough in that excites you that you sort of like have to keep that as you continue to work on it.
Yeah.
Because that work can be intense, you know. And then if you have like a life event, you know, like I did, it just is hard. Like it throws you off. Even it throws you off of the work, you know. Certainly it throws you off of that magic, but like it also just like, yeah, it's but it's worth it, right? To keep going. And yeah.
That sounded like a question.
Right, Andy? Isn't it worth it?
I think so. Yeah, I do think so. You know, it's funny because, you know, the bigger projects, the few that I would consider like these are the bigger elements of my work. A lot of them, almost all of them, have a similar trajectory of a lot of buildup of like exploring and a lot of things that felt unrelated. Then, oh, this thing clicks. Then there's magic. Then it's exciting. And, you know, it feels like, oh, I've got it. It's right here. And then you realize that's the beginning of the project.
Oh, no. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, but I will say, you know, you finished a lot of projects, so you know that, that it is worth it. And that a lot of times, you know, like, whether it was Invisible Things or Right Side Out, both those projects, the after the middle of the marathon where the magic's gone, like that, the years after that, both of them had several years, like 2 or 3 years where it's like the magic fire isn't right there, but I'm trusting it. And then once I got it to the end, it's like, oh, thank God I did that. Thank God that I just, it's almost like a stewarding of the magic that you felt and being like, no, I know there's something there.
Yeah.
And I have to honor that or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that totally makes sense to me. And these projects you're talking about, and this one that I'm working on, are such huge endeavors. They're years, you know, you have to have that sort of like dedication to them and trust in them enough, you know, to know that they're worth it.
Yeah.
And I think being able to pick up on those pieces is like, what I think it's a very useful tool for a creative to be able to, you know, understand how special those sensibilities are, you know.
Can you talk a little bit more about that specifically? Because when you said like pick up on those pieces, or like, I don't know if you could flesh that out a tiny bit. I was curious.
Yeah. Well, I think that there's a huge sense, there's a question that I get asked a lot, certainly, and I'm sure you do too, just like, well, how do you find your style? How do you find your voice? How do you find like who you are?
Yeah.
And for me, it's those internal like sensations, yes, we could talk about like a story just coming to you, and that's great. But you can't like always conjure that.
True. Yeah.
But like outside of that, what just like delights you or sort of makes you feel super passionate, on a day-to-day basis, you know, with things that surround you in your house or in nature, or the people that you're around, or the music or whatever, like all those. And you talk about this a lot, just that taste. Mm-hmm. And I think being sensitive to those things, like there are things that I feel sensitive to where actually I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
And this is not I love my husband so much, dog on him, but we have been fixing this house together, and it's like we are speaking 2 different languages.
Yeah.
Or I'm like, look at 10 of these colors, you know, and I can he's like, they're all gray. Not really, but like, where he will listen to an album, like he's super big into music. So he's like, did you hear the production there? And I'm like, I actually wasn't. The music went past me.
Yeah.
So there are just these sensitivities that feel so natural to us that I anyway, think it's very easy to just bypass them. Well, everybody feels that way. Yes. But I don't think everybody feels that way.
No.
About that specific thing that maybe you feel that way about. And when I started to sort of realize this, I actually I'm part of the Art Brand Alliance. I don't know if you have heard of that or familiar with that.
I have.
It's like a group of artists. It's like a network, but they have sort of internal like social hours, but then talks. And there was a thing within it called the Creative Directors Club. And we did a lot of exercises on like building our own, like if we were the creative director of our world or our creativity, we spent a lot of time like doing visualization things. And we did experiences like, or exercises like if you were to plan an event, how would that feel specifically to you? And what would you do? And what scent would you have? And what would be the food? And what would be the music and all that? Those things that you pick out that seem so easy to you. And then we would all share them. And someone would be like, I want to be on the beach and I want to be drinking like pina coladas. And I'm like, I can't imagine anything worse. No, I love the beach, but you know what I mean? Like that would not jazz me up. That would be vacation. That would be like, I'm not working right now.
Yeah.
So anyway, those are the little sensitivities,
And what, last time we chatted, you were talking about the mouse and the bee living in a cider press.
Yeah, they live in a cider press.
And I was thinking like, that's a great example of one of those because you said that offhand. And when I listened back to it, I was like, I would never think to do that in a mill. Like that would never occur to me because I don't even live in a world where cider presses exist. I'm not like, honestly,
oh man,
it's just
Andy.
not. And then I love, like, that's a great example too of your reaction to that was like, oh, how tragic.
You got it. I'm also like, you live in Ohio in the Midwest. Don't you guys have apple orchards?
Yeah, we do, but still, it would never occur to me. And to you, it's like, you're just like, what? How are you talking about? They're so central to existence.
That felt like such an epiphany when I started these, I drew so many regular houses that they lived in. And I was like, man, this does not feel special to me. Like, and I was trying to put all these pieces together and I don't even remember what it was. I mean, I have drawn and like dreamed about cider presses for a really long time. Owning them, having a cider party. I mean, it's just like, that's just kind of where I came from and what I love. And that's what, and I think I was drawing one. And then I was like, wait a minute, we could just put a door here.
Yes.
And then it was like, it actually took me a really, really, really long time. I felt like an architect to figure out exactly how that cider press turns into a house, how the press part would have to be up enough for it to be 2 floors, and then how I would put a wood stove in. And like, it was actually very exciting to put that together. But anyways, yes, it's a great example of that sensibility where, it's central to the story, but actually not at all. It's just like such a fun detail.
That's, I love this thing about, we're talking about the bigger projects in your path, in your practice. And like, of course, if you're lucky, you have a lot of smaller projects that are more fun and they're not as precious or whatever. But I think if I was talking to myself at 22, before I'd ever trusted any of that sensitivity long enough to get into some of that meatier stuff, I think I would say, first of all, like, trust it. Trust those weird, like, intense feelings that you have about things. Like, do that, like, go that way. But also, I would say, like, and when you do, the further you go into those, the richer creativity is going to feel. Like, these bigger projects to me, I think I'm kind of like, even, it's not even about whether other people, if there's probably some of those projects that I feel this way about that aren't really quintessential to me, or maybe weren't super successful or whatever. But the creative the richness of the experience was deeper than I thought was possible when I started out. Because when I started out, I was very much like, oh, I'm pumped about like band posters and drawings and like, I love this scene and hand letter type and all that. And it was fun and it was cool and I was into it. But it was like the style and trends and stuff like that. And I just I think I didn't realize like you talking about building this house in your mind in a cider press is just, and watching how enjoyable that is to you. Cause you're like, as you're saying it, you can see, you're like, yeah. And then I'd have to, okay, how do we get it in the house? Well, the door's this side. Like just like, it's so funny, but that's like, I didn't even know that existed when I started. I didn't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't either.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. And I think that's why, I mean, I feel like I don't really ever trust things that feel too good. And so for a long time, it felt too indulgent even to like work on that. Like it just almost feels like I said, this isn't serious work. So I probably shouldn't like invest my time in it. It's so interesting. Well, I started off not in picture books, but a little bit in editorial, and that was so difficult for me. And then I got into picture books, and still those seemed to be so difficult for me. And I loved doing them. But if I look back at every single picture book, it was a struggle. Like I tried so many different attempts for those. And now I look back and I'm like, it's just a totally different feeling than what I'm working on now, because it feels, well, I get to make all the decisions, which I like. I mean, I have an editor and an art director, but like, yeah, I think I didn't know, maybe I do feel like part of I think building up and doing all those books for other people and working on projects that I didn't love early in my career has sort of built up this stamina. And I need that now to work on these books for so long. And I think that's a great part. And also when I first started, I did an interview once and I literally told people, I don't have any stories. That's why I'm an illustrator. So I'm just going to do other people's. Now I'm like, this is wild. Like, I don't want to do anybody else's stories right now. Cause I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know. And I'm just like, well, I'm just a nobody from this small town in the Midwest. And, I'm not really like cool. And I still don't consider myself like a book person. Sure. I don't know like how to come up with stories. They're not super plot heavy. And so, I think, but you just gotta, once you like get rid of all of that, I don't know. I think it could be kind of simple.
And also I love what you're saying about like the snowball-y effect of the journey of you sticking at it. I have the same exact experience of creative stamina for longer projects built up slowly over time. I'm able to, still hard, but I'm able to do bigger things than I thought I would be able to ever. And it just happened slowly. And you saying, I don't have any stories, like just saying like, you don't know what you have. That's the thing about this creative practice is as you go through it, if you stick at it, you're going to find all these abilities and stories and things in you that you don't even know that you have. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I totally agree.
One thing I was going to ask you about was when you're talking about this moment where these characters were having these conversations, and you were kind of talking about it. It sounded really trippy in a way that was awesome and interesting. And I'm just wondering if maybe you could speak to that for a minute first, because it's just really juicy and fascinating. But then also as you've worked with the material that came out of that, have you seen where some of that maybe, like when I was making really terrible music in college, a lot of times it was just like people were sending me this instrumental stuff, my friends, and I was like just making vocals and weird stuff, and it was all kind of like stream of consciousness. And almost always by the end of the project, I was like, oh, I know what this is about. I thought it was literally random. Now I know what I was thinking about or what. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about those conversations. What did it feel like? And then as you've worked on them a long time after that session and those seasons, Have you started to figure out why these characters live in you? I don't know. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about both those things.
Yeah. So I think one thing for me is that with any project I'm doing, generally like the emotion of the character is the top for me. Yeah. That is like always kind of what I'm after. And I feel like these two characters, this bee and this mouse, are two sides of me for sure. Yeah. But they're also like, not that necessarily those two sides like have conversations, but maybe they do. But I love like acting. I used to do theater like really, really long time ago. And for me, when I'm doing a book or especially like thinking about these characters, it's so important for me to feel that emotion of them, you know? And so Miko is like, that's the bee. She's like super fiery, like super high energy, has all these ideas, bit fickle, like could be like mad and then happy immediately. And then the bee is then the mouse is, her name is Henry. And she's so like calm and sort of like put together and kind of sees things from like above perspective. You know, she's just like a little bit more wise. And I feel like those are both, that's like really two sides of me. And when I'm seeing them, I think I can feel a few things. One of them is humor with their their conversations, because they're a bit humorous, not like wild comedy, but they're humorous. And like a sweet humor, like the Ghost book is like sweet humor, you know? Yeah. And then there is this sort of like appreciation for life. Like they have such a small little, I mean, they live in a cider press and they're tiny, but it gets snowy and that's the biggest thing in the world to them. And it's just, the stories are really simple. I think that for me, like you said, you know, you have all these sort of random pieces and then in the end, you're like, oh, that's what that's about. I think that when I'm seeing them in the very beginning, when I, you know, like I can sort of just sense these moments, working towards the final has been a tremendous amount of cutting and editing. Like I literally started writing these things as like novels, but I'm like, children don't really read novels. And this probably isn't like the best material for like 30-year-old or like, you know, like an older person, although it's like me writing it, but yeah. So I had to cut down so much. Like I had to cut down even so much of their conversations. I had to just pare back. They're written in graphic novel forms, a whole other beast. Oh my God. It's just been so difficult. Yeah. Such a challenge. But I think what's interesting is that when I sensed them in the beginning and now I put them out on the paper and I cut all that down, what's left of it is still that seed. Like it's still I guess the relationship between them and their relationship with their like immediate world and them appreciating life, which probably is just how I've always operated, you know? Yeah. So I think that is really what has always been important to me is like the emotional relationship between myself and others. And,
What were we going to say?
I don't know. I was going to say, well, I don't know if, maybe like in the very, very, very end of it, I could come up with a different sort of reasoning or maybe like a more clear, you know.
No, it sounds
reason, but I think
great. The thing that I heard in it was a big part of how I think about creative work has been influenced by the internal family systems idea, which is this idea that you're made up of all these different parts of you, and it can be useful to personify these different parts and have like relationships with these parts. And I heard, and you know, a lot of my heroes, when I heard them talk about their work, like Charles Schultz talks about Peanuts, all these different characters being different parts of himself. But also the guy who plays, Dave Goelz, who plays Gonzo, and he plays a bunch of other Muppets, talks about how each character is like a flaw, an exaggerated flaw of himself, pushed to the extreme until it becomes lovable. And I thought that is such, and that's what I hear you talking about is this. You said two things about how you felt about these characters, which are these parts of you. One, that you can see the humor in it, which feels like a level of emotional distance that is the observer and being able to rise above your situation and kind of get a little and not take yourself too seriously. Be like, oh, it's funny. Like, watch my parts doing these things. And also, you said, like, to appreciate their world and appreciate their dynamic. And that feels like a development of self-love, of like appreciating these aspects of yourself and being able to cherish them with this little bit of distance. And I think that's like super deep, man. That's so cool.
Thanks. No, it's so nice just talking through it and yeah, I've been working on it for so long and I am a like really reflective person. So I'm often thinking of these, but it's like, I've had few conversations about this aspect of it, and what that means. And I think it's super insightful to sort of see it from the outside. And like you said, almost be a steward of these things that you're sort of like bringing into the world. And I do see myself as separate from it and that's how it feels when things come to you. I'm not a big, like, I don't believe that there's a muse and there's an idea and it's going to come to you or go to somebody but I think that something fired in my brain that could, probably have only happened in this specific brain that, I think, I now have like the responsibility of carrying it out. And I do feel like, I don't know. Yeah. I guess the creator, but not,
Yeah.
The like, I don't know.
You're like
caretaker. I'm the caretaker.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
That stuff.
Yeah.
The other thing I just want to hint at is, you said a few times, like the emotional relationship and it not being super plot heavy. This is something that we touched on last time, was this idea that illustrators are like non-glamorous actors. And I find myself like a lot of times, my wife has pointed out when I'm drawing, I'm making the face that I'm drawing. Right?
Yeah.
Which is weird. It's bizarre. Like you said, like you have to feel the feeling that you're putting on the page. It's very acting. And I did theater too. I think there's something very like, there is something there. And I also just wanted to highlight that there's this, there's conversations around Alice Fraser, who's going to be on my show. She's a stand-up comic and she wrote a book about romance novels. And I heard her talking about this, but I've heard this conversation. I've heard it in The Heroine's Journey by Gail Carriger. She also she writes a lot of like romance and like relational books and how these things have been like seen as less than action movies, or like they're similar things. And also there's a symbolic nature to the things that are going on. And I guess I'm just getting at that, like, the illustration and the intuitive side and the relational, emotional side is so rich and so much about what kids react to in the work and what adults react to in the work. And yet I think because it doesn't register with there's no translation to the logic element of the brain. You can't literalize it, that we sometimes belittle it or demean it when it's really just such a powerful thing. Hearing you work this stuff out and relate to it is just it just feels really rich.
Yeah, I think it sounds similar to those things that come so easily to us. And, we value those things that maybe we make a little bit more challenging. And and I think we all, we're human. So like we all have those, like micro moments of like misunderstanding or joy or, like that's mostly what our life is. But I think when, I wasn't really taught how to write or, do stories and so the only thing I can think of is, well, when I did learn, there needed to be this clear arc and there needed to be like this problem and this climax and this, and it's so formulaic.
Yes.
That when I started to put these stories together, I was like, well, they're not really a story. Nothing really happens. But the stories, though, that I love are like coming of age things where barely anything happens.
Yeah.
Except for this person like deals with, like internally reacts to the world, which I don't know. So,
yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, and yeah, I think there's a lot of different definitions of what a story is and what it does. There's a specific arc that has a particular endpoint and inflection point. And then there are ones that have a more meandering style that circumnavigate a thing and kind of more impressionistic. I think you're totally right there. One thing I wanted to come back to was when I was reading your post where you're nestling into winter and into this new house, you talk about how, I think when you haven't moved house in a long time, you don't realize that it's so uncomfortable. It's really moving out of a comfort zone into a discomfort zone where there's none of your creature comforts are set up. Everything's undone, whatever. And you talked about creating those little spaces in your house where you could find a little bit of that, even amongst all the discomfort. And it just made me feel like in dreams, they talk about houses or buildings as like a structure for your psyche. Like that's a symbol of, this is like the structure of your inner world. And it made me think like, as you're moving from these stages and you go into a new stage of the creative process, like the book or your creative journey in a larger way, where now you're a different person than you were when you started wanting to be an illustrator. I wondered if you could just think of any ways in these new phases where you were able to set up some of those comfortable nestling spaces within the discomfort of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I'm 100% following you. I think so. Finding those sort of comfort senses in creativity, not necessarily in a house, but yes. I think for me, it's realizing that I don't have to love everything. And maybe I love things at different phases. Like I don't always love working in a sketchbook. And sometimes I love it. And sometimes I just don't want to do it. And like just being okay with that, being okay with the fact that like, I don't have to do that. If I want to just do one spread, I can do that. And I don't have to pick it up for 5 months, just letting myself off the hook for that kind of stuff. For me, I meditate and I write every morning. And that is so important to me. And that is like a very grounding, I think helps me be a good human, but also creatively. I think that's just such a like special place you can take anywhere. So right now I'm mostly just working on the books. And then I'm also actually illustrating a book for another author right now. And it's totally different. And that has been interesting because I said I wasn't going to do it. And then this book came along and I did it. And I think from that, I'm trying to like trust, I don't know, maybe set up a system where I trust my internal instinct versus like what I think other people want from me. That's a big setup. That's kind of hard. That's not like it's not a simple one, but I guess you'd just be seeking joy. That would be the simple thing. Like what sounds fun right to this thing? What would like make it enjoyable for me to do? And my husband was looking at the spreads. I put these sketches together and he came and he's like, wait, is any of this in the book? And I was like, no, that's me putting my joy in it. And he was like, it looks crazy. I love it. Like, it's awesome. It's so weird. And I was like, yeah, thanks. I was really trying. So, to be weird and joyful. So kind of carrying that through, you got a heavy project, but you still we have like rewarding jobs,
I love that because you instantly went to, as you're navigating different stages, the tricky part of that is determining what stays and what goes.
Yeah, 100%. Right? Yep.
Even when you move house, usually you get rid of a lot of stuff too. And you think, what am I going to carry over into the new house? And you instantly the first thing you went to was, the ways you're going to be open, where you're like, okay, just because I used to be the person that was doing it in the sketchbook this way doesn't mean I have to bring that to the new house. I can actually do it any other way I want to. And then, but you also tune into where being present with where you are in this stage and saying, but I am going to carry the meditation and what was the other thing you said?
Just journaling.
And journaling, meditation and journaling, because that's something that actually feels right in this new season. And I think that there's, you kind of went through a bunch of little things like that where you're deciding what are we throwing out and what are we bringing on? Because you don't have to start completely fresh in the new house either. You can bring some of those things over. I think that's a really good way of tuning into. Last episode we talked about listening to yourself to find like ideas. This one, I like this tuning in to your emotional state, to your joy, like you said, and discerning like, okay, what needs to stay and what needs to go. That's an important part of the transitional process, I think. Yeah,
I think it's a good analogy, moving houses and stuff. And then also just like in a creative practice, like I think we focus a lot on like, what am I going to do now? I'm going to be efficient at this. I'm going to get good at this. I'm going to, it's always like a positive thing, but what can obviously I had to let go of a lot of stuff. And thankfully, there's a silver lining in everything that happened, that I'm okay letting go of like a lot of stuff, a lot of stuff. But yeah, then you have to decide like, okay, well, what is really helping me out? What can I keep around? What's worth like holding on to and like continuing, in this new life.
Thanks, Becca, for joining me on another episode. Hope we get to speak again really soon. Can't wait to check out your books and all the new projects you have. Sending love to you and yours. And hope that you get to come back again shortly. Massive thanks to Sophie Miller for editing and co-producing this show. Massive thanks to Connor Jones of Pending Beautiful for the audio and video edits as well as sound design. Thanks to Yoni Wolf for the soundtrack and the theme song. And thanks to everybody for listening. Until we speak again, stay pepped up.